So first I wanted to thank the BIAC for hosting our roundtable. It's a precious topic, considering equity and integrity in circus education. And it's a great opportunity to open up with you also on those questions. So to help us taking stock of the situation and to have a sort of overview, there's 4 panelists with me today. And the aim is really afterwards to open up with you. So to start the discussion, I think we're going to start with Vicki, and Vicki Dela Amedume. I've been practicing on her name, but it's tricky for me. She's going to give us an overview on circus arts, on the sector, but rather on the diversity of the circus arts. Maybe just I'll present first all the panelists, and then we'll have the floor to Rosa Matthis, who's a researcher, and she's conducted a research in 2021 really on abusive conduct in professional circus schools. And then I'll give the floor to Alisan, who's not only in the board of FEDEC, one of the board members of the European Federation of Professional Circus Schools, but she's also in Stockholm, head of the Bachelor program. And then finally, we'll give the floor to Patric Jean. And Patric works for Jump, but he's also an artist. He's a filmmaker. And he's here to give us his testimony because he's just been leading a training on gender issues with a group of 20 people that ended this morning. So those are the panelists. So let's start with Vicki.
Hello. Hi. So I'm Vicki Dela Amedume, and I'm artistic director of Upswing. And I was asked to speak about equity and integrity in circus teaching, and I've interpreted that quite broadly. So come with me on a journey. I thought that the most useful thing that I could do was to share some thoughts and provocations about inclusion, equity, and integrity that have come from my own journey through the circus industry. And I've chosen the word industry very specifically because I think that will become clear as I'm speaking. So, who am I? So I'm the artistic director of Upswing, which is a contemporary circus company that's based in London. We're an award-winning company and a Black-led organisation. And we endeavour to make circus that's not only artistically powerful, but one that is also relevant to communities who might not see themselves or their experiences and stories represented authentically in our art form. We also advocate for, present and mentor the work of underrepresented artists, especially global majority. And by global majority, I mean people of colour. Artists and creatives in circus. I'm also Associate Director of a theatre in the Round, a producing theatre in the Midlands in the UK, and Creative Director of the Albany, which is a cultural hub and a community arts centre in southeast London. And all of these roles kind of dovetail with my desire to create spaces where people can access culture and can manifest culture that's relevant to themselves and where they come from. Being part of circus was definitely not in my life plan. I grew up in a very, very traditional West African family in southeast London. And as a refugee, my mum's greatest wish for her 3 children was that their lives would be easier than hers. So choosing a life of an artist and also a career that has life-changing risk at its heart was definitely not where I expected I would end up. I actually began my circus journey completely accidentally after meeting and befriending a group of circus artists when I was studying at university in Leeds. I loved the work that they were making, I loved their energy and their joy and the fact that they let me in. I was a competitive athlete at the time. I was training in sports and athletics. And this was a real shift for me to enter a world that I felt wasn't driven by competition. Within the community that I was working with, there was this real idea of family, of working together, of living together to create these incredible artistic experiences that were based on this deep physical trust that we shared. And it was a brilliant and romantic idea that led to what I can describe as a flexibility in the boundaries between the professional space and the personal space. I would say in that context that we had a passing relationship with health and safety. The idea was that we were all in it together, and we were creating this space where we could take risks together. And it's best illustrated by a moment where I found myself sitting at the top of a 10-meter metal rig in a thunderstorm, singing with a colleague as we tried to lower our equipment before it got too wet. And I think that's not an unusual story in our industry. So I worked with that group for about a year before moving on to more formal training, and I accessed a series of professional formations working with various institutions in the UK and in France, including the National Centre and CNAC. Moving into the formal education space brought some new narratives about circus to me. The narrative of being elite, one that was not unusual to me based on my competitive athletics training. And also the story of meritocracy, the idea that your skills and your talent are all that matters. But in this space, I wasn't being asked to run really, really fast in a straight line or to throw a javelin as far as I could. I was asked to bring my body and my history and all the associations that carries into a space and take risks with my body and all of the associations that that carries. From the first moment I entered circus training, these stories of meritocracy and elitism jarred. On a daily basis, I was implicitly and explicitly shown what a talented and a successful female artist should look like and what I should aspire to emulate. And it did not look like my large, strong, curvaceous brown body. I want to be really clear, nobody sat me down and told me that you're not welcome or you're not valid. But in small daily ways, I was made to feel out of place, I was made to feel exotic, and I was made to feel unusual. I also had now a new story to connect with the story that I was carrying with me. So the story of circus as a family and as a community that embraced difference, and the story of circus as a place where we are a pure meritocracy, where talent is all that matters. And these two stories together created a very, very potent culture that said, we are all in this together, we are all equal, we're all experiencing the same challenges. It was inspiring and it was utopian, but it just wasn't true. The story left me feeling alienated and largely unseen in those spaces. After training, I went back into the professional world and I experienced many, many wonderful things. I made shows that I'm hugely proud of with people who I still call friends today. But I began to reflect on why this industry was a place that I didn't feel that I could thrive. I reflected on how we see ourselves as a community on the fringes of society as beautiful outsiders, but how our power structures, our schools, our companies, and our institutions all replicate very broadly the wider society that we're in. In the wider world, we don't have many people of colour or many women in positions of high power, and we don't allow for example, a well-integrated disabled community. Recognizing ourselves as outsiders, beautiful outsiders though we may be, gives us permission to ignore the ways in which we perpetuate problems that are in wider society that lead to inequality. I think I really learned how to be an artistic director working outside of Circus. I feel like I had that experience working in contemporary theatre. Now, I'm not saying that theatre is a utopian space. It has its own challenges around inequality and diversity, but it has very, very different formative stories. The first time I worked with a theatre company, it was made clear that we're not a family, we are a company. It was the full understanding that I was there to do a job. I expected to be paid, and I expected to be treated with respect. There were difficult conversations, but there was a clear structure, and good intentions were backed up by systems and processes that were reviewed and adapted. It was not perfect, but it was definitely a culture I felt people were willing to address the cultural issues that might affect how we work together and who was able to thrive in that space. It didn't need us to be a family, it just needed us to be responsible colleagues. Today, I function as a circus director, a producer, an educator, and artistic director of Upswing. Setting up the company was really a survival mechanism. And it's a drive that I found that I share with many other artists from traditionally marginalized identities, from queer identities, from disabled identities. I wanted to create a space where I was able to work authentically and explore how my identity connected with my artistic practice, but on my own terms. And I wanted to use a critical reflection of the culture that I'd experienced in other places, the idea of circus as a family, the idea of meritocracy, and the idea of being an outsider art form, to guide me into thinking about how I could create a space that would hold other people safely. At Upswing, our productions are often an exploration of the relational dynamics between people, and we work with a really broad range of artists. Some of our productions are specifically aimed at children and families. Others have older performers. Most are focused on global majority artists and their experiences. And we're generally asking our artists to bring their full selves to the work, so not just their skills and their bodies, but their histories and their cultural references and their experiences. And to do that, we've needed to develop systems that balance risk-taking, because circus is about taking risks, but also care. A small example of that is that via our union, we access an affordable service that provides free mental health counselling and professional advice to company members who are working with us. It means that they have outside support to hold us accountable to our commitments around their physical, mental safety and respecting their professional boundaries. I'm noticing now that more schools, companies, and institutions are concerned with recruiting students and artists who reflect the diversity of our society, and I think that's brilliant. But I question how much thought is put into reviewing the culture of the spaces that people are being invited into. And I really think about the difference between inclusion and integration. It's a great intention to want to invite people in, but what are we doing with that? Is the process to help individuals gain confidence to navigate that culture? Is the system judged successful if an individual learns to navigate and conform to that culture on the face of it well? On the face of it, my career has been successful, but it's been challenging. I think in looking at how you invite people in, invite people into these spaces, it's really important to think about how you can improve the conditions that you're inviting people to work in and what you need to let go of to make that space for people to enter. I wanted to propose a couple of new narratives that are fundamental to the way that Upswing operates. I think to be open and to be curious is part of the creative temperament. It allows us to face situations that challenge our beliefs and our cultural patterns. And I think perhaps this is a more useful narrative for our community to lean into as it tries to reinvent itself to be relevant to contemporary society. We're all part of a bigger system, one that often prescribes unfair power structures and relationships with groups. And as individuals and as institutions, we need to recognize how this manifests within the culture that we build. We can't just rely on traditions. We need to ask ourselves how we can see beyond our personal experiences, beyond what we've always known and the ways that we've always done things, to make sure that we understand the nuance of the different lived experiences that are now appearing in our spaces. Another useful narrative that I want to hold on to is that our art form is predicated on hard work, being prepared to be challenged, and being able to learn from failure. I think in order to be successful, we need to learn how to fail better until we succeed. And the choices that we make every day about the culture that we work in and how we invite people into our spaces make a direct impact on who is able to thrive and survive the spaces that we were building. Nothing happens without making informed choices, and those choices happen on a daily basis. So I think the biggest provocation I would have for everybody in the room is leaving here. What are you going to do next? What tangible action are you going to take next to reflect on your culture and your space and think about what you need to let go of to make it safe for everyone?
Thank you. Thank you, Vicki. It's very inspirational. Great, thank you. Rosa? Do you want to give us some conclusions on your research, please?
Yes, thank you. I don't know how to sit on this chair. So, I prefer writing to speaking, so I'll be reading. But please don't hesitate if there's something that you don't understand. Of my broken English, here and afterwards. So, to present myself in one sentence, I have been in circus since I was a kid. Today I run a small circus company, and in parallel I do research on what I will present to you here. And what I will present is a brief presentation of the content of my thesis and my research. It's up here. I wrote this thesis as a part of a master's degree at the Faculty of Philosophy and Arts at the University of Linköping in Sweden. It was presented in June 2021. It is a structural approach to abusive conduct within circus schools, and I'll come back to that sentence in a minute. The focus is on the management level of schools, and the study examines subject knowledge amongst principals. Focus is put on the management level in order to achieve and provide knowledge of measures and attitudes related to prevention. And I choose to look at schools since I believe it's one of the most important places where circus cultures are defined and developed. And I choose to focus on management because my interest lies in the power and prevention, or power of prevention. I mean that within schools or companies, also outside the schools, no change needed can be done without the active involvement of the headmaster or director. together with their surroundings, they can bring about this long-term change. They have the power to choose the long and complex road that prevention represents. I wanted to know if they want to and if they are capable, if they have the means and the knowledge. So I'm going to give a short summary of the thesis, but before I do that, I would just like to mention a couple of terms so that everything is super clear for everyone. And I think we have the first one here. I'll read it for the translation. I think it's good. So this is the definition of abusive conduct that I have made. This means that it's not that I invented it all myself, but I did make a definition that really suited my research. So if you Google it, you will find similar things, but it's also useful to have in mind that it might always differ from a little bit what you're looking at. So this is what I felt I needed in my research. So abusive conduct, any physical, verbal, or emotional act that treats a person or group less favorably if they are presumed to have a certain distinctive characteristic or difference. It can be discrimination, moral or sexual harassment, abuse of power, bullying, violence based on, for example, gender identity, sexual orientation, political or religious beliefs, disability, physical appearance, health status, racial criteria, skin color, national or ethnic origin, social background, or other. This other sometimes can be tricky, but yeah, once again, this is what I choose for my research. Next definition is the structural approach. So there are two general approaches through which to measure and comprehend abusive conduct that we just mentioned. The structural, when abusive conduct is perceived as a structural problem, this means that the whole organization is concerned as much in the creation of the problem as with its solution. My research uses a structural analysis. The isolated approach would in contrast be when abusive conduct is understood as an isolated individual phenomenon. This means that the problem is considered to concern exclusively the victim and the harasser and their respective personalities and circumstances. This understanding fails to consider a wider analysis of power dynamics and societal constraints of discrimination. It looks at the problem only on individual levels, and it risks bringing measures halfway. It fails to see the broader cultural and institutional context. So, as you might have understood, it means I understand the problem. Yeah, you can keep it there. Yeah. I understand the problem of abusive conduct as a problem of the organization as a whole, and not as a problem between only the individuals, just what I just mentioned. That is to say that I see abuse within an institution as a result of a malfunction of a society and culture that allows it, and this is very important for what follows. I think I can take a classical example just to be like really getting into the topic. So, are you familiar with catcalling? Yes? Yes. So, when a person in the street is being catcalled, the individualistic explanation might look at the way the person is dressed or behaves, while the structural analysis points at the responsibility of the harasser and the society for considering a short skirt or whatever other physical aspect to be a green light for the catcalling. So now I think we really mentioned this term, and the last time, I don't have it on a slide, it's bystanders. which means the people around, who knowingly or unknowingly allows or does not allow abuse to take place. This means that without an uncritical entourage, it is difficult to create cultures of abuse. Or put in a little bit more positive way, with an environment that does not tolerate abuse, we create healthy and non-toxic environments. So coming back to the example of catcalling, when the surrounding does not accept such behaviors, they are much, much less likely to happen. Coming back to my thesis, the study I did used an anonymous questionnaire sent to representatives of schools that are members of FEDEC. I think you can wait. I don't know when it comes, but we'll find out, yeah. I contacted 51 schools, which is, I think that's the whole number, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, correct. Of which 31 responded completely on my survey. And I was quite happy of that result. I think it's good. The analysis of the material was made possible with the help of research on abuse in other fields, such as sports and academia. Especially research on high-level gymnastics has been of much help, since it is a field that is much more developed in on these topics. The results confirm the presence of cultures of abuse in a majority of schools. Also, the results show that knowledge of prevention differs considerably from one school to another. This ranges from carefully crafted prevention to active protection of abusers. The results of the study highlight the fact that management must do more to apply preventive measures against abusive conduct. Thus, it is important to encourage management to aim for transparency and openness on the subject. The study underlines the importance of better knowledge of the role of the bystander in these institutions. The idea that sexual harassment is a personal matter between two individuals rather than the result of a codependent environment remains a fundamental problem. If or when bystanders obtains tools for analysis and action, an important step in stopping the normalization of destructive cultures can be taken. Yeah, maybe we can take the questions, because I don't really know and I wanted them to step in, so it can be a good moment. So these were the 3 questions that I had for my research. And I've already started to talk about the results, so I don't know if I should show them earlier. And after this, but I think we can do that after. We can show the questions that I sent, but not yet. We'll leave it. So the questions that I had for my research was: is abusive conduct understood as a current problem within circus schools? So as I just mentioned, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Which dynamics are enabling abusive conduct in circus schools, and which tools exist for circus schools to address abusive conduct? So in my resume that I do here, I do not really respond to all of these questions, but you're really welcome to read or talk to me about this in more detail if you're interested. I'll get back to my text. Drawing on recent statistics, the study also underlines that equality needs to be better taken into account, as women are significantly underrepresented in teaching and management positions. Such biased representation is shown to have a negative impact on the teaching and learning environment. Finally, it should be noted that research in this specific area is almost non-existent. As such, circus, along with other artistical disciplines, is in dire need of more research in order to make art schools safer places for its practitioners, staff, and artists of tomorrow. That is the summary of my thesis, as I said, in a very, very brief format. And to close, I would like to come back a little bit also to the question of shame and taboo that circus schools have when it comes to the subject, and not only circus schools, also the entourage of the circus. In circus, people will not be safe from abuse as long as the schools and the circus entourage fear and are ashamed to talk about these questions. I argue that, and this is a very deep problem, many headmasters, representatives of schools and companies, believe that they are obliged to claim the perfection and well-being of their institutions in order to protect them, instead of assuming the responsibility for their shortcomings and developing an institution that protects its students and staff, which I believe would be to show real courage, actually. It takes people that dare to talk about these things and dare to listen. Destructive power may only act if it is giving the legitimacy to do so. That's a very hard word, legitimate. Was it good? Yeah, legitimacy. To paraphrase the old story, let's just admit that the emperor is naked. My interest lies in the deconstruction of cultures of ideas. How is it that artistic schools still regard discourses of abuse as if they were pedagogical tools? This is a contradiction. Art is supposed to break codes and limits, not people. The pedagogy of humiliation is an obsolete way of working. However, still today in the circus, people continue at all ages to maintain the fable of the master professor who is tall, tough and mean, but for your own good. I am interested in discovering how circus may develop and change towards an idea of itself as a practice that identifies differently with equality and respect to diversity, and that first and foremost learns to look critically at hierarchies upheld by one gender, one skin color, and one body standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. So as a European network of professional circus schools, it was just so many evidence that we had to do something, that we could not just leave the sector like that, and that we as a network should support the schools facing all those issues. So it's good. So I'm passing the word now to Alisan, who's a member of the board of FEDEC, and she can explain how this issue was tackled.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Are you all still awake? Yeah? Does anyone need to stand up? You're circus people, right? You're all still alert? Okay, if you do need to stand up, feel free. Otherwise, stay seated. Do as you will. Thank you so much, Vicki, and thank you, Rosa, and thank you, Isabel, for having this panel. I think these are really important vectors for us to be thinking about as we think about what we as individuals can do and the limits and possibilities of the agency we have in each of our situations. And we all have access to agency and choices, but we don't all have access to the same choices. So some of it's figuring out which things can we choose and which things can we initiate. I'm going to first speak using my FEDEC board member hat. I will say that as someone who found circus in the United States in the 90s, when later I discovered there was a European Federation for Professional Circus, it blew my mind, and I am thrilled to be part of it. This is a very cool thing. I'm going to tell you why it's so cool to me. It is a hub of knowledge construction and knowledge dissemination about circus. So what we do in the FEDEC broadly is we bring together people who are invested in circus education, professional level circus education. We discuss common issues, common situations. We figure out what things are happening among all the network schools. From that, we then take a direction and we develop tools, which we then disseminate back into those communities. Right? But the tools are also available for everyone, so anyone can continue to work with the knowledge that we've developed. Early on in the FEDEC, the knowledge construction that was needed was very much about the physical practices. So we have manuals on the FEDEC website translated into multiple different languages that look at core techniques in physical practices, so pedagogical practices in different disciplines, different circus disciplines. We can deconstruct that word at some other panel in the future. But right now, let's just stick with it. So sear wheel, straps, teeterboard, German wheel, these kinds of things. And we also have a charter of ethics. We have guidelines on best practices in teaching. We offer thoughts on rigging and safety, which is now being, there's a project where we're renovating that knowledge based on increasing knowledge and what it is to rig for circus. And then several pedagogical manuals that look at similarities across different disciplines. So verticality, gravity, what are these themes that keep coming back? Cool. Very physical, very still hotly debated, very concrete ultimately. Now it is very clear, I think, to all of us in society and also in circus, that we are at a place where we need to look at socio-emotional and psychological tools to ensure the safety, the emotional well-being, and the physical well-being of the students and staff that are in our programs. We are, as Vicki said, it's weird. Circus, we're not actually separate from society. It's almost like we inherited all the same problems as the rest of society, which means that we can engage with those. We actually have the ability to keep engaging and making choices about what we move forward with. Are those things that we inherited essential for our continuing practice? Is it essential to be using a more classical form of a humiliation pedagogy in order to accomplish the same level or an increased level of artistic apprenticeship or artistic development? I'm not going to say the answer, but I'm pretty sure you all know where we're headed, right? We have this power to question what we take forward with us. And the reason that I frame it in that way is I think it's also important that we recognize that we inherited a lot of things. We were all taught things in our family culture, in our society culture, and through media culture. We have a lot of history we're bringing to the present moment. So it's important for us to have empathy for ourselves as well and say, if I want a different future for my students, for my company, for the audiences, I have to take accountability for the things that I have learned and figure out different ways to choose something else moving forward. In order to do that, sometimes we have to go learn tools. It's okay. There are people that have worked on this, and we can go find out what they know, and then we can learn from them. So as FEDEC, what we've done, and I'm going to hand it to you in a minute when we move on to Patric, but we've said, okay, it's clear that what we need to do next is find out what the gaps are in our network of circus education, build tools, and then disseminate those tools to rectify some of those gaps. But before any of that happens, we need to be better informed about the language, history, vocabularies, the kinds of work that's being done outside of circus that can help us provide accurate and reflective tools for circus. We can't superimpose what's been done necessarily in dance or in opera or in theater. We have to also, we would like to work within the histories and genealogies we have of circus practice, and also make things safer and healthier for all of our students and staff. So we're in that process right now. You're hearing us talk about the very beginning moments of this very exciting thing, where we're learning those tools. And we have an idea already of what kinds of things they are, but you'll talk more about it, I think, soon, Patric. There's a very a specific nature, and Vicki, you brought it up as well, this really communal, community feeling, a lot of the intersections that happen in Circus between teaching and practice and peer-to-peer sharing and skill sharing, and there are so many phenomenal ways that we develop that are outside of standard academic hierarchies. I think we don't want to lose those. So it is really important that we inform ourselves as much as possible about the different strategies that are being used, so we find strategies that are appropriate to Circus and we don't lose a lot of what we value about Circus in our communities. Speaking as, I'm going to then switch a little bit. So that's my FEDEC. I'm speaking on behalf of, 50, 60 programs. I don't know where we're at right now.
Nearly 70 members.
70. I should know that. Okay, I'm going to take off my representing all of those members for a minute, and I'm going to put on, I am the program head of the Bachelor of Circus Arts at Stockholm University of the Arts, formerly known as DOC. And within that capacity, I'm a program director, but I'm not the school director. We have a university. And I think many people are in a similar situation. We have a certain amount of power, and then there are a whole bunch of things we don't really have power over. We can initiate, but we can't complete. And so in my personal reflections, I try to work with, what do I actually have the power to change? There are things I have the power to change. Do I have the ability to, in what places do I have the ability to demonstrate our values? Who are we hiring? Who are the students working with? Where do their hours go? Where does our budget go? These are things I can choose in my capacity as a program head. But there are other things I can't. But I can work with culture change. I can work with discussions with the students. I can work with discussions with other staff. And we can figure out where and how does this change happen within the specific history of the program that I'm in. It comes with its own history and culture patterns. Within the structure of the institution that I'm in, which has certain guidelines and rules. Within the broader structure of the way Sweden designs education and has expectations, and the Swedish circus culture that's local. So there are these different layers that I think we can also each assess. Okay, what are the different layers and networks I have access to, and to what extent do I have agency to complete a change or to initiate a change in any of those? So that is a reflection point I would contribute to all of you. I think about it a lot in my own work. And then finally, even on a more intimate level, as an educator and as a human, as someone who was a circus student, I am regularly constructively challenged by the things that students bring to my attention and what it means about things that myself and my peers accepted when we were learning circus, right? This is, it's a beautiful moment to figure out how you have an opportunity to go through your own work. Okay, why at the time were we okay with that? What has changed now? How do I find out from my students what a future looks like where we don't accept those kind of things? Does it mean different dialogue? Does it mean different policies? Does it mean different cultures? I don't know all of those things yet. But I do think there's a moment for individual confrontation, almost is too strong of a word, but introspection, recognition that we also are part of a process. This is a process. We couldn't have known everything then when we lived these things that we know now. What we can do is invite a future that doesn't look like our past. And that takes a lot of courage and creativity, and I am excited to embark on that with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alisan. So the connection with Patric is about the logo that you see on top of the slide, Speak Out. So we've launched this project in January. We, I mean FEDEC. And the idea is really to go to those managers in the school as identified with Rosa, and to help them in finding what the future is going to look like, what Alisan was saying, and by setting up a series of activities. And one of these activities are training sessions. The first training sessions happened and ended today, so it's 3 days training. 20 people from different schools came and discussed various questions regarding gender. And the trainer of this training is Patric.
Thank you, and Isabella. Yes, above all. So today I'm the outsider for once. It's a good exercise for me as a white, cisgender, heterosexual man, knowing nothing about circus. So you're wondering maybe what I'm doing here. So I'm here in the name of Jump, which is a French and Belgian company. The founder is Isabella Lenarduzzi. She was here until this morning, and we worked together. Isabella likes to say that the company Jump is an activist company. So in the circus field, maybe we don't look like activists, but I can tell you that in the bank field, we really look like activists. So most of the time, we work with quite big companies, international companies, managers and top managers of the companies, working to help them to make a more diverse and inclusive organization. Well, we spent 3 wonderful days working on gender issue, we could say, with 20 people coming from different schools, circus schools of Europe. So we worked on concepts about equality between men and women and non-binary people, sharing experiences and trying to find out solutions to different kind of problems, how to convince, how to adapt, and strategies, of course, for managers of circus schools. So we used to work with very big companies, and it's of course very different. I think we can compare circus schools to small organizations. In the biggest ones, first of all, it's a business issue, gender, diversity, inclusion, because there is a reputational risk for companies today. It's not for ethical reasons they want to work on it, they don't care about ethics. But there is a reputational risk for them, so an economical risk for them. That's why they have a lot of money and sometimes big crews working only on that topic, which is not the case in small organizations. Of course, they have reporting procedures, they have data about everything, about the number of men and women at every level of management, about the pay gap, about everything. So it's totally different. But in small organizations like circus schools, most of the time people think they work, as you said, in a family. So first of all, it's not a family, but anyway, when I hear the word family, I don't think it's even better, because you know the family is the place in the society which is the most dangerous for women, for children. If we speak about domestic violence, sexual violence. So to say we feel like in a family, well, it can be a problem in a family. There is a fear to speak about the problem. Most of the time in a family, we don't speak about the problem. And so I told you, I know nothing about circus. I just spent 6 or 7 days in a circus school, working with teachers and students, but well, that's my only experience. But I learned at that time and this week how important is the tradition in circus. And if I understand, the tradition is a wonderful thing, but it's also a problem if we work on the gender issue. So, well, that's what I learned. And those 3 days were also a moment of co-creation. We were not teachers and they were not students. So I suppose this is a first step for you and for us to try to understand more and to improve the situations in your institutions.
Thank you, Patric. So as Patric was saying, this training was 1 out of 4. So another one is going to happen in September in Paris, and we have various partnerships. So the idea is not to stay into the schools, because we believe that it's a sector problem, and not only Circus, but also Art Street and probably other art forms problem. But so we are trying to open up as much as possible. So here the partnership is with the Archaos and the BIAC, and this roundtable is also a way for us to start the dialogue with other people outside the schools. And then in Paris it's going to be with Circus next during the Fresh event in September. And each time on a different topic. So this time was on gender issues. In September it will be about the body and nudity. And then we have another 2 training sessions in 24, one in Fira Taraga in Barcelona, in Catalonia, and on auditions and how do you recruit people with all the bias that we may have. And then there'll be a final training session in Austria in one of our member schools, and this one will be on communication, internal and external. When something happens in your school, how do you deal with it with your colleagues, and how do you start opening the dialogue with people outside the school? So outside those 4 main training sessions, we also have made available budget for the schools or the organization to host their own workshop. So if they think that it's more relevant and if they don't have money on their side, they can still have a local workshop in their own language with the local association dealing with those issues. And in between, as I was saying, we've got this kind of roundtable where we're trying to open up also and build a community of people wanting to change things and make Circus a safer place to be. I think that's all on the side of us, but maybe you have questions, I hope so, and the floor is yours. There's microphones and you can speak in French or English. Vous pouvez parler en français puisqu'il y a les interprètes. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions?
Hi, Vicki. I was really interested in when you were talking about what you need to leave behind in your organisations, because when we think about inclusion, quite often it's about we need more diverse boards and we need to bring people in and we need to add things. So I'm just wondering if you've got any examples of things that you need to take out and leave behind.
I think one of the big, it's culture change again. I think one of the big things that we needed to leave behind was the assumption that, you know, even me as a black woman in the circus sector understood everything about the global majority experience and the lived experience of the people that we were bringing into our spaces. And leaving behind that sense that we needed to go into this knowing everything and knowing how to fix everything, knowing that we needed, you know, as Alisan was alluding to, have an iterative process where we were constantly listening and constantly reassessing how we were functioning. And I think the other thing that is kind of added but taken away was you know, that particular action of creating a space where our artists have somewhere independent to go to talk about the challenges they might have working with us has been really, really valuable, because what it's done is left behind the pressure for us to, left behind the pressure for the artists to feel like they need to be able to articulate their difficulties to us, or to me, or to the exec director, and for them to have somewhere where they can explore and understand how and what they want to articulate to us before that conversation is brought to us. It's been really interesting, that kind of, I guess it's a leaving behind of that sense of needing to know everything and have expertise over everything, and looking at where we can make ourselves porous to knowledge, but also bring in support. And I want to say, we are a funded organisation, but that support that we get is via our union, so we pay something like £75 per year per person to be able to access that. It's not a lot of money.
I just mentioned that everything that we're discussing, everything is going to be on our website, on FEDEC website. We have a resource section, and Rosa's study is on it, research studies on it, and all the tools that we are going to bring together during those years of projects are going to be uploaded, so free of access for everyone.
I have a question for Rosa. Could you tell us about the title of your thesis?
Thank you, because I forgot to mention that. So, because people sometimes wonder. This is a quote from one of the, maybe we can go to the questions that I asked, because I forgot that. So these, I guess you can't read it, it's too small. So these are the questions that I asked. And there was also space each time for people to comment. And there is one question in the end where I asked, that is not in the, it must have been missed out, my fault, where I asked the participant, it was in the end of the questionnaire, to talk a little bit about the beauty of circus and like things also to end on a, maybe a little bit more positive note. And so I had all kind of answers, and I found this one quite striking in the title. So it's, it's one of the participants, it's a quote.
Do you remember what the whole quote was? Because that's only half of it, right?
We protect animals well.
But
it's the full quote.
It's the full quote. It's been a while since I read your thesis.
Well, me too. I'll check.
It was also implying that we don't protect humans well, right? Like we figured out a strategy.
Well, I guess that is like the.
Maybe that's just what I took away from it.
Yeah, and that is maybe what I also hear within it. So I kind of like to let it open in that sense. I think it's interesting. If we talk about it, I think it's interesting because it is interesting to reflect upon how circus has been treating animals and how this has been actually, there has been a change, and I think I'm not the best person to talk about the work that this has been done, but it has definitely been done, like the discussion of how animals are treated, and then you can read this sentence in several ways, and I am not going to answer for the author or authors. However, yeah, so it's I think it's good to leave it open, but yeah. Did I answer?
Any other questions?
This is a question a bit to all of you, but maybe also to you, Isabel, but answer please who feels. Like, I'm wondering concerning the whole program of Speak Out, like if there's already connections to this whole field, then of the market, of the field, of the festivals, of the houses. So after circus education, when young makers, artists find themselves in the field, there's all these questions also coming up, and all this training program sounds hilarious also for curators and programmers. I was wondering if there's already maybe curators also taking part, or there's connection somehow with that field, or if that would maybe be the next step of a Speak Out program.
You mean if it's accessible for people who are not inside circus education? Did I understand correctly?
Yes.
Yes, of course. Of course, there's a priority for the members because they're the people we're connected with. But that's what I was saying. There's partnerships, and the idea is that we can find place for everyone who's interested. Really, we found a funding which is quite amazing. We used to have fundings from Erasmus+, and we still have, but it's very limitative on what we can do. And now, under the DG Justice of the EU, we found the DAPHNE program, and it's flexible enough for us to adapt to the needs of the sector. So yes, and we've got those sessions which are called Speak Together, and so during our conferences, but also if any organization wants to invite us, and we can come. And Jump was saying that they will be also available to offer other trainings, really tailor-made for the sector. So just contact us and we'll find ways that we can work together.
I would like to hear your definitions of equity and integrity, if possible.
To whom? To someone special, or
no.
as a group? Oh, no, okay.
It's more, I would like to know if you all have the same one definition, if you're all working with different.
I think whenever I come across words, I love to look at the dictionary definition. And the dictionary definition of equity, if I remember it rightly, is different from equality. Equality, you have the sense that everybody is given the same thing. With equity, you have the recognition that not everybody has the same experience, and you adapt your approach to make sure that everybody reaches the same outcome. That means that sometimes you have to give different things to different people. And integrity, I mean, different definitions, the idea that something forms part of a whole, and also the idea of the moral imperative behind the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I would say the integrity is the what and the equity is the how. That didn't define it, but...
But I think more and more people are talking about equity as opposed to equality, because more and more, as we understand the way that society functions, and we are more aware of the disparities in the way that people experience world based on all kinds of metrics, that equality actually isn't fair. We need to be thinking about equity and what specific approaches we take to deal with different intersections of discrimination.
Since we are talking about the words there, integrity, I wonder, for a circus sector that's quite small and people meet each other in different roles often, one's as a teacher and a pupil, and then the week after playing together in the same or acting together. How can you deal with the shifting roles and the closeness of everybody within this community? Because maybe that's something that's quite specific for circus, and that gives the community feeling, but also like the possible downfalls of challenges of that sector. Anybody?
Yeah. So maybe coming back to, fill me in, coming back to I don't know if we should go to the family aspect again. I want to be positive, actually. I want to say that it is very useful because since we're a small sector, so now we're talking to specialist schools, and we also have to say that in this work that we're doing, and also in my research, I did turn towards management, but it doesn't mean that it was only management that responded. It was often or management or people close to close in the administration, or also people, I add this because I think it's interesting, or also people in charge of questions of gender or health within the school. And this is also something that happens here. It's not only management present in the training session, but still it's people concerned with these questions. And these people are different, and as you say, will work in the school, but might also perform or be organizing a festival. So, I mean, Alisan, as far, it's we're all a good example of people wearing several hats. So, once again, being positive about this, because we have clearly talked about the problematic side of the family and how these things can be destructive, but I also want to see the part that actually what happens is that in this sense, we can touch fields quite closely, like coming back to the question before, can this also be directed to people outside of schools? Well, in some way it already is, because it depends on people in this room are not only working in schools, they are also organizing festivals, working in companies. So I'd say that I want to think that is good. And I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I just wanted to reflect on that kind of inherent tension between freedom and formality. My natural instinct is to lean into informality and that kind of lightness of space that creates. But as I've worked for longer and longer and longer, I realize now that I love a policy and I love a system. It's true. People can move between spaces, but those spaces need to hold some kind of form and some kind of structure about how that space operates and what kind of behavior you need to bring into that space. So the way that we behave at a party is different from the way that we behave in a school or, an institution, but having policies that understand those kind of Venn diagrams of the places that people go to and then can respond to that flexibly, I think we won't be able to really enact a culture change until we start to do that work. And it is messy, and it is complicated, and it does bring in a professionalization to the space. And I'm tested by that, because I didn't go into theatre and I didn't go into dance because those spaces were so formal that I couldn't access them. But Circus allowed me a way in because of the informality of it. But I think we're at a tipping point where we need to think about how we can bring in some systems and policies that allow us to have that breathing space, but also keep people safe.
Yeah, to continue with what both of you have said, I think part of what's exciting about this project and the fact that this project Speak Out was funded and this direction with the FEDEC is, I think what we're trying to avoid is adopting things that have been done in other locations and assume that they work for Circus. That's never worked for Circus. We all know that we've been in very, like you said, flexible and porous situations. And there's a strong desire, I think, from students, but also educators and programmers and these people that have lived all these different spaces to say, how do we do this without losing the circus part? And personally, from the workshops this weekend, having already had a certain amount of interest and training in questions around gender, this workshop was an excellent reiteration and kind of re-upping of present knowledge of how do we discuss this now. I think it's very important for people who are in positions of management, of responsibility, to show up to these things and be reminded, okay, what are the terms we're talking about? What do we know now? Why is this actually an issue still? It actually is still an issue. And I borrow a little bit from universal design for accessibility in spaces. So a ramp works for everybody where stairs only work for a few people, right? Like, so if you can design a ramp, you get people in wheelchairs, you have people with walkers, you can push carriages, anyone can walk up a ramp. If you make a universal design that works for everybody, then you're already at a starting place where everyone has access and you can create an environment. I think that's where we're at conceptually, is how do we find an access that works for everybody, and then we can talk about like if I'm talking about the ramp, the aesthetics of the architecture, we can keep the circusing of it without limiting access.
Yeah, and sorry, just going to say one last thing. I just had a thought as you were speaking. I think the other thing that we need to start getting better at understanding is the dynamics of power in spaces. I think we're not really good. There are lots of hierarchies in circus, but we're not really good at recognizing them and being transparent about how they manifest in the way that people are able to deal with each other. For example, if I'm a teacher at a school, I'm also a performer in the show, I must recognize that I'm different from other performers in that show, because in another space I have power that changes the dynamic of how I function in a space where we are all meant to be equal, because everybody knows that when we finish that show, they're going to come back and I'm going to be in a different hierarchical system. So how do we manage our understanding of how power works in different spaces and how it bleeds across into other spaces to manage the way that people are able to abuse power to cause harm?
And just add to that, it's a provocative question a little bit, and I'm not sure, do we really want to let go of that power, and that's hierarchy?
Okay, thank you for the extensive response, all three.
We haven't mentioned the collectif Balance ton Cirque, but they have also done a good job in provoking the sector and making us move faster. So we're also very, we are also happy that this thing happened, even if it was a horrible a bomb for the schools. It made us realize that we had to take action and that the situation was unbearable for all the victims. Il faut le micro pour les interprètes.
It's just something that came to me the other day, because we live in different countries and realities. And for example, we were making event in Porto, in Portugal, and the town hall obliged you, and do very well, to have access for different kind of people with different needs. But then I was thinking, but then when you are in the street, you don't see people in wheelchairs because they just can't, they exist, but you can't circulate in the city. So how to extend that to the responsibility of, because you try to create a lot of things, but the people just can't come. Okay, if they reach the theater, they can go inside, but they can't circulate in daily life. And a lot of people live in ghettos, and there is a whole society revolution, transformation, I don't know, that we shouldn't accept anymore, because, okay, you can make a lot in the arts, but in the daily life, a lot of people just don't exist or have a space to really exist. I was thinking how many friends I have, how many people do I know, how many people I cross every day in the streets, and I don't. well, but we live in different realities, in different countries also, but it's not, there is a lot to be done in the society itself. Thank you.
It's what Vicki was saying about, I think, inclusion and integration, that difference. Hey, there's a space for you, but we're not going to help you show up. Right? It's a very big difference. I think it's personally, I think it's a relevant starting point as a metaphor, but also just to be careful with the limits of that metaphor if we're talking about other kinds of gender inclusion and different kinds of diversity. But it is a helpful starting point to say, yeah, if we can make something accessible for everyone, we already have access to more of our humanness than otherwise.
And I would agree with you. I think it's really interesting that there is a responsibility that you've taken up to make your venue accessible that's not met by the city that you're in, to make the city accessible. That's a problem, but it doesn't mean that you should stop making your venue accessible. Exactly, yeah. Exactly, but then I think also by doing it, you're creating an example for your city, you know, and I think there's something really valuable about culture and creativity, that it ultimately has this feeding effect to reinforce, you know, what we demonstrate as our values actually gets reinforced and echoed and amplified in other spaces. So I really value what you're doing. I think it's impressive. I hope your city takes your example and picks up on the lead that the lead that they've given you. Hopefully they will pick that up as well.
I have a question. Among Circus schools members of the FEDEC, how many schools have a female director?
Good question. I know in France only one, and we've got like 15 member schools in France, so 1 out of 15. But at international, I think we've got figures, but I don't have them in mind. But of course, it's a minority.
For me, it's quite exotic because everywhere, I mean, in the companies we're working with, which are not schools and above all not art schools, that's the first question. How many women are CEO? How many women in the COMEX, in the CODIR, etc.? That's the main point, and I think it's quite important because when we try to create a balanced situation between men and women and also non-binary people, but well, in most of the time that's not an issue in many companies. They even don't speak about that. But when you try to create a balanced situation, you need to change the culture of the organization. First to hire women because they don't want to come if there isn't a bad culture about women, if they don't feel good. And if they don't feel good, they run. Of course, they don't stay. So there is a lot of money to work on this, to change the culture, to let women come at every level of management in companies. So it's very strange for me. That's not one of the main points of the circus schools. Who is in charge? Who has the power?
In FEDEC board member, yes, in the board, like 5 years ago, out of 12 board members, there were only 4 women, and now we're reaching parity. But it's not easy because there are not so many women leading a circus course.
So, and like as numbers are always like useful. Now we got the number of the management, and then in the schools again. So now I can only talk about Belgium and Sweden, which were the countries where I could look at numbers the most specifically. There's this I don't know what form it's got, but it's something very pedagogical where you can see that. So graduating students today in circus schools represent Belgium and Sweden, have an overrepresentation of women. So there are more women graduating than men. And then when you look at the teacher positions going from starting teaching and having like the difference, well, I know that's it's less this kind of, but having a fully employment or a partial employment or a complete employment. So the higher you go in the amount of hours that you have as an employee and being a fixed employee, do you say it so in English? The less women there are as well. So women will represent the teachers that are only partial employed, and the full positions will have a clear majority of men. I don't have the numbers here, but it's also in my computer. But it's a clear difference, yes. And it's, of course, very, very white.
Any more comments or questions? Yes? Wait for the microphone. Thank you.
I would like to hear more about the difference between integration, because it was the first speech about Vicki. You said one moment, difference between integration and inclusion. I would like to hear more about this, because I don't know the difference, and it interests me.
So I think it comes down to power again. I'm going to go the long way around. Programs that I've seen that I think lead to integrations are usually programs where, for example, if you have a diversity initiative and you want to recruit more diverse students, you will focus on reaching out to people, selling them a story about your institution, getting them through the doors and into the building. And that program will be primarily focused on getting them to work effectively in that space. It will probably not take the time to think about how they might influence change in that space to make it work better for them. And people coming in the future, but it will probably focus, the success markers on that program might be they get through and they graduate, but it won't look at the experience that they have of the school in that period, and it won't look at what needs to change in the culture of the school to make sure that the next student coming in has a better experience, or it becomes a more attractive space for diverse people. Inclusion will create a space where you have some time of reflection, and that person coming in has the ability to influence the culture, to help you reshape it, to make it work better and be more functional and be more fit for purpose. And I will say that I've been involved in diversity initiatives where there is a massive drop-off because people come in and they realise that they've been invited in, but they haven't been welcomed. And they have had no influence on the space around them and no power to change. And do you feel most unsafe in the places where you have the least power? So I think, has that answered your question? I think integration doesn't give power to people to make any adjustments around how they're working or how things are working for them. Inclusion allows for that.
May I? I jump. We have. Well, I think it's the same thing, but we have another way to explain it. Integration as to welcome everybody, but people different from the norm are stuck somewhere in the circle. For example, in companies, you can welcome a lot of women, managers and so on, but they are stuck in human resources or communication departments, for example. Inclusion as a situation where everybody is welcomed, but everywhere. So individuals are welcome regardless to their gender, origin, or anything, which is, well, totally different, of course.
Following what you explained, just want to ask if in the trainings the students will be part of the feedbacks on the training. I don't know who will be in the trainings that you are developing this year and how the students would take part in it.
So the students were not invited to this training because we were really focusing on managers, because we really took the conclusion of the research done by Rosa, thinking that if we start by the managers of the school, the impact will get better, and that was our starting point. So, but we do still want, of course, to work with the students, and that's why we are organizing some local workshops, because we cannot have the students coming to our training. It will be difficult to have them all starting traveling. So the idea is really to enable the schools to have their own workshop in their country with a local association dealing with a topic that they really think is adequate. What we're trying to do at international level as a federation is to offer our members tools, activity, events that they cannot find at their own level. So we're always trying to find an added value. So I don't know if I replied to you.
Can I jump onto that? In FEDEC, we've had this, in the board especially, we've been having a discussion about how to enable the FEDEC to be more porous to student knowledge. Now, one of the complications with students is that they turn over at a very fast rate, right? And when we discussed it at the board level, we also observed that the students are being pulled to represent themselves and their schools in every situation in a lot of ways. So they're being asked to be on my students are being asked to be on the student union for the university. They're being asked to be on like student representatives for Nation, which is the Circus network in Sweden. They're being asked to sit on our jury for selections. They're being pulled in all these directions, right? And mostly they just want to train, or they want to do their own things. They want to focus. They're at school to focus on their own education. So we have been cautious in FEDEC to prescribe a way that students should be part of this. What we've done is decided that at meetings where there are students present, to always now invite a conversation with students and continue to ask them, hey, do you want to have some kind of representative that comes to board meetings? So far, no. Students haven't said they want that. They do want, like, I will be going back to my school and doing a report for the students on what came up here. And I think as we continue with this, we will develop different methods, and we'll share different methods that we're using to discuss this with our students. Necessarily, student knowledge is part of this, and student experience is part of this. At the same time, as you're saying, the responsibility and accountability for change lies with people that have the power to take actions, to change culture, to change budgets, to change where we're putting our resources. So it is incumbent upon us to involve the students, but not outsource responsibility to the students to make these changes.
Maybe just add, well, I was going to say the same thing, and I also think that because you mentioned Balance ton Cirque earlier, and I think they've done a good job also in defending that it is actually not their job to have this knowledge and to do this work. And I think it's a really good point that they have made. Yes.
So this is a question for the audience. Are there things you wanted to hear or thought you would hear from this panel title that we didn't address and that we'll put on our list for next time?
Je pense que j'aurais aimé qu'on regarde un peu plus ce que le cirque a d'intrinsèquement porté aussi de raciste, de colonialiste, de sexiste, parce qu'on parle du fait que, comme toute la société, on est gangréné par ça, mais par tout ce qui a été freak show et toutes ces choses qui ont composé le cirque à un moment donné, on a été vecteur de ça. Et là, j'ai l'impression qu'on ne le regarde pas vraiment.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the point was that what she's missing out is that we didn't reflect on all the inheritage we have on various topics, and like yes, why is circus carrying things like racism and so on, and we didn't dig into this area during this roundtable, and she would have liked to. It's true that we didn't really think of this topic because we are very much focusing on the gender issue, which we've been working on this week. So I think that's why. But it's a good topic that we could also, I mean, there will be other roundtables, so why not?
I can say something. Because I also find this really interesting and also very important, and I think that it goes hand in hand with, well, it's an heritage of a culture, and so you talked about, and we have been talking about the romantic picture that you create of the positive image that you have of your family. And so I really like to, I'll just pick things of history that I'm interested in, and this forms also part of how you create a culture. So sometimes in circus, the we, and I don't use so much the we, but we talk about, then say it's, look at these things in history, how queer circus has been, how difficult, how in the border, and how you can like, the variety of history that circus brings, and this is really important, and because it might be true, but it also might be a really dangerous place of where you kind of permit yourself to create a discourse of we being so inclusive. So I think that's very important to keep in mind. And then just for a funny curiosity, I think it's funny to think about that various dictators and history has loved circus because it's been a representation that has shown one kind of norm of strength and beauty, and that has also performed without bringing a political message except the one that is the norm. So that's also a curiosity that I think it's important to bear in mind when you think about the history that we have. I don't know if that was, but that's what comes to my mind when you talk about this.
Shall we close the session now? Is everyone happy? No more questions? It's been recorded, so this session. So if you want to share it with peers and so on, we're going to put the link on our website. So thank you for everyone being here, and thank you for the panelists for those inspirational speeches and the conversation, which is only at the starting point. Thank you very much.